Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of ModGear. This week, I'm driving the Mclaren 12C, an automotive legend that many loved all around the world. So, let's just get right into it, shall we? But, before we begin this week's episode, let's take a step back in the past for a brief history lesson. Our story on the 12C begins in the year 2007. McLaren, for the first time ever, decided they want to make a road car, as they hadn't actually made a true road car since the Mclaren F1, which was regarded as one of the greatest cars ever made, and if you're an automotive nerd, you probably know why. And so, McLaren decided, okay, well, we're gonna need some test cars to test our, our parts, because, we can't build our own prototypes yet until we have, parts. And so, McLaren decided that they needed to go to Ferrari to purchase a Ferrari 360, so they could use it for testing. And for some reason, they're not going to steal Ferrari's cars. They're definitely not stealing Ferrari's cars in this case. They just go up to them and say, hey, can we borrow this for testing? Because, we definitely don't know you. They used the Ferrari 360 that they bought from Ferrari to test the 12C's engine. The engine in this case being a 3.8-liter twin turbocharged V8, which honestly sounds interesting, like twin turbocharged. That already sounds bad, Twin superchargers on a Koenigsegg was bad enough, but no, twin turbochargers, that definitely sounds good. So then, after they finished testing the engine for the 12C, they instead went to another manufacturer to test some other stuff. In this case, they went to Ultima. No, not like the Nissan Altima. I mean like Ultima with like a U. They're good guys. So they went up to Ultima and they basically just told them, hey, we're gonna borrow one of your cars. Okay, thanks, bye. And so they used this Ultima GTR to basically test the braking system as well as other components of the car's suspension for the 12C when it actually, went on the market. Because, they had to test it somehow, but for some reason they couldn't use a normal Ferrari 360 for some reason, because, they're people and they don't really want to use the same car, I guess. I don't know, British. Then, because, naturally for a car company, McLaren then went back to Ferrari to get another Ferrari 360, because, they need two of those things apparently. But this one was actually, surprisingly useful, because for some reason it was used to test the car's exhaust system. Why you couldn't test the exhaust system on, like, the current cars you already had, I had no idea, and, that kind of makes sense why they had to buy a second car just for an exhaust system. That seems a bit far-fetched. So honestly, at this point, it just kind of seems like Ferrari is just kind of like handing their cars over because McLaren's trying to rob them. Let's be honest here. But eventually, the car was unveiled in September of 2009 at some convention. I actually have no idea where it was unveiled, probably like Geneva or something. The car's engine actually made a surprisingly large amount of power, making around 592 horsepower and 443 pound-feet of torque. But what made the 12C so special was how much it actually weighed, and the car weighed in at around 2,900 pounds, which made the car get from 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds and have a top speed of 218 miles per hour. So this thing was definitely loved by the community because of A, how light it was, so you could toss around corners and whatnot. B, it was power hungry, so you definitely all had the power there, and it was surprisingly economical and reliable too. Surprisingly enough, McLaren actually offers like a really good reliability for their cars, even though, you know, you're still paying like $200,000 for one of these things, but good reliability. They also have some decent MPG, and let's face it, the trunks in a lot of McLarens are actually surprisingly big, and the 12C is no exception, so if you want to do like weekend driving, you can do that. But altogether, the 12C was loved by many people around the world, both in places like TopGear, where it set, you know, lap records and stuff, and let's face it, Jeremy Clarkson loved it. From news magazines of people reviewing it, and just all around, this was a very good option for people's first supercar, because while it was a bit expensive at $200,000 roughly, this was a car that was both economical, reliable, and could be driven daily. Anyway, with that pretty short and surprisingly McLaren-y history lesson out of the way, we can get to this week's episode. Take it away, Panda. Thank you, Mr. History Panda, and with that, we can begin today's tests, starting with the top speed test. Welcome to the Genesis 1 Mile Dragway. It's a place where many cars come to push their engines and, well, a surprisingly large amount of their speed, you wouldn't believe it, to their limit, simply to put their speed onto the boards. So let's see how the McLaren 12C can do in this test. The McLaren MP4-12C, whichever you want to call it, topped out at a wickedly fast 159.8 miles per hour, but with some further testing could definitely hit 160.3 miles per hour. Definitely a very good run indeed from the 12C. Next up is the braking force of the brake test. The goal of this test is also very simple. We want to make sure that all 4 of the car's brakes stop once it passes this white line. The goal of the test is to not hit the parked Nissan Leaf, and if you do, you want to measure your distance based on how far the Nissan Leaf moves from its parking spot. So let's see how well the 12C can do in this test. The 12C does have sort of, and very sort of in quotes, slippery brakes, but the Leaf didn't move that far from its original parking spot, so therefore it isn't necessarily a bad run, but the brakes do worry me. So it's definitely a okay, pretty successful run from the 12C, but the brakes still definitely shocked me. Next up is the cornering test, and to do that, I've come here. This is the Forksville test circuit. Developed by the ModGear development team, it's used to help judge a car's endurance on tight corners, tight bends, and jumps, to further prove how a car might perform on a track-focused setting. So let's see how well the 12C can do in this test. McLaren does pretty well in this test. The car pretty much flies through most of the corners on this circuit, but the car does have a tendency to spin out under very heavy cornering, and I do say very heavy because it's very heavy. There is some oversteer with this car, as again, going into a corner might cause you to turn in like way later than you think, but this is easy to correct either by letting off the throttle, braking, or just, that kind of thing. But overall, this is a very solid run from the 12C. Next up is the back it up in this of the parallel park test. The goal of this test is very simple. We want to make sure that we can park the 12C between these 2 parked Renault Meganes, and what we do, we want to make sure there's enough distance both in the front and in the back of the car for someone to walk through. So let's see how the 12C can do in the parallel park test. and after some wiggling, I will say, McLaren passes this test. Next up is the roads of Monte Carlo on the gravel roads segment. The goal of this test is also very simple. We want to see how well a car can drive on day-to-day driving conditions, whether it's be bumps, potholes, cracks in roads, maybe a slippery road or a flooded road or something. We just want to see how suspension travel works and see if you're going to be dying or not. So let's see how well the McLaren can do in this test. The 12C does pretty bad in this test. The suspension is just basically being shattered and, it's dying and it's being ripped apart. The undercarriage is basically being slammed in and also ripped apart, and lots of sparks were present during this test, as you can see, as both the front end and the back end were basically being just ripped apart. It is a very unfortunate run from the 12C. Next up is the slam dunks of night on the bump test. The goal of this test is also very simple. We want to see how well cars can tackle just giant bumps, see how their front ends as well as their back ends cope, and undercarriage, that kind of thing, just to see if they can actually do bumps and are you going to feel comfortable with it. So let's see how well the 12C can do in this test. McLaren doesn't do well here either. The suspension is, well, it's still broken and dying, and the undercarriage, front, and rear parts of the car are basically being ripped to shreds as well, and there is also some sparks present. It is also a very unfortunate run from the 12C. Next up is the turn left to go right of the slalom test. The goal of this test is very simple. We want to see how a body roll and a loss of speed can affect a car while in a track-focused setting. We already know a little bit as to how the 12C corners and body roll and all that, but we're going to go ahead and test this anyway, just to get a better idea. So let's see how well the 12C can do. The 12C did pretty well in this test. My only major complaint that I noticed was the oversteer. This car can definitely turn into a corner far later than normal due to oversteer as turning out wide, so combating this oversteer is a must, but it's very easy to correct by either letting off the gas or, depressing the brake a couple times or hitting the handbrake or something. These things can all easily correct it. But either way, and aside from this, it is still a great run from the McLaren. The MPG figures the 12C has are relatively okay, with an average of 15 miles per gallon in the city and 22 miles per gallon in the highway. For a V8 like this is definitely pretty solid, but in terms of just overall MPG figures, it really isn't that great. But aside from this, how do these figures apply on the track? And now, let's give the McLaren MP4-12C an official lap around the Futaro circuit. The official standard time is 1:25:51. With added up accidents and collisions, the final adjusted time is 1:27:51.
The McLaren 12C is a lightweight sports car that everyone loves to drive. But, can it be used as a daily driver? To find this out, let's head to Union City, to pick up a bottle of the city's national dish. Candy Pop Vanilla Milk. After I had parked, the 12C gets some surprisingly large attention.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Nice.
Yo, what's up?
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Thank you!
Now that we got our milk, let's head to back on the Autobahn, and towards Free Park, a mountain drifting road.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Nice.
Gay!
Lock him up!
This car corners like a dream. It feels like him flying through these corners. It's so stable, so grippy. I might be in love with this thing. So, should you buy a McLaren 12C? Yes, as long as you have a big smile on your face.
So, what are my final thoughts on the McLaren MP4-12C? Well, this car handles, and it's a stretch, this car handles like a dream, being able to fly through corners going quickly, basically wickedly fast essentially, with the 160 miles per hour, being able to fly through those corners very fast and not having to worry too much about, spinning out and oversteer maybe. And the reliability in this car especially is also very good, so if you do get in an accident or something, you pretty much got the coverage. And the brakes are pretty good as well, but they are a bit slidey, so that is something to watch out for. But honestly, I would highly recommend this car to basically be a weekend car, and maybe even a daily car, since, as I said before, the trunk is surprisingly big, and McLaren actually makes these trunks big because they expect you to at least daily drive these cars to a certain extent. But I would definitely highly recommend this car if you're looking as like a first supercar purchase, or if it's just something to add to your collection. This is definitely a car for you that I highly recommend you try, because you're going to love it either way. But anyway, on that British-like note, it's time to end. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Good night.